Hi there, I'm Chris Heaven and I'm the CEO of Survival Dispatch. I'm recording this prologue after we recorded this episode of Survival Dispatch News. Our original intention for this video was to highlight the asinine nature of the Preventing Private Paramilitary Act that was introduced by U.S. Senator Edward J. Markey and Congressman Jamie Raskin on January 11th, 2024. This bill will not only codify making it illegal to engage in paramilitary activities, but it will make it illegal to give or receive training and to practice various techniques. That includes martial arts, firearms training, field medical skills, virtually anything that could be construed as survival training. Mike Glover did a recent video on this topic, as did Jack from Black Scout Survival. They both noted how it would shut down virtually every business who provides any type of survival skills training. We decided to bring in a constitutional attorney who's tried cases all the way to the Supreme Court. What we discovered was far more shocking than what we anticipated. As you watch this video, you'll see the look of disbelief and anger on everybody's face as the gravity of the situation unfolds. The content of this video is extremely important for our fellow Americans to hear, and I would encourage you to hang in for the entire 1 hour episode so you fully grasp just how much danger the American experiment is in. And we're back, and we have got a star-studded panel for today. We've got our in-house CIA Agent 007, Jeff MD, with us. We've got our ordnance disposal expert, Mike Sterling. Don Mann is back in the picture. We missed you, Don. Thank you for coming back. We thought you abandoned us.
No, I missed all you guys too. I got COVID twice since I've seen you last.
I felt abandoned.
Well, maybe instead of bringing Todd Callender on, who's a very high-profile federal-level attorney, we should have brought like a psychiatrist on board or something today, or a therapist of some sort. So before we dive into today's topic, which is this atrocious bill that the Democrats have introduced to limit people's ability to weapons train and those sort of things, Mike, give us the conflicted question.
Conflicted question of the day this is from the Desolation Deck. After the end of the world, you're traveling a year to get back to your spouse or significant other, only to find they believe you died and have started a new family. Their group offers to let you stay with them. Considering you are out of supplies and have seen no other groups, would you join them?
This is straight out of The Walking Dead. Like, it's exactly the way that you got to do better than that, Mike. Okay. All right. So before we hit record on this, Jeff, you had a really important question for Todd to address. Let's start there.
This whole stopping the training nonsense. I pointed out that, we have a constitutional right to assemble. First Amendment, freedom of assembly. We have a constitutional right to keep and bear arms. Second Amendment.
Yes.
The government, to me, doesn't seem like they have any authority to keep us from exercising one right while we simultaneously exercise the other. So if people get together, exercise their freedom of assembly, and do it with their AR-15s, which is their right to keep and bear arms, and if they decide to shoot targets while they're doing it, how can the government realistically stop that? It's like, you have a right to go to church and you have a right of freedom of speech, but you can't speak freely in church.
Exactly.
It makes absolutely no sense to me.
It shouldn't make any sense to you. And these are keen observations, and I'm glad you asked the question. People don't want to confront the reality that your constitutional rights were suspended on March 2020, and you don't have any constitutional rights. Worse, you not only don't have any constitutional rights, your human rights were suspended the following day. You don't have any human rights. As early as January 1 of this year, our Health and Human Services, aided and abetted by the Congress, a defunct body, said we're in the middle of a Marburg pandemic. that has the effect of a public health emergency. When a national emergency is declared, you're under martial law because all power cedes into the executive branch. That happened, and then it continued. When a public health emergency is declared, all bets are off. The public health authorities are in charge, and your constitutional rights and human rights disappear. They are replaced by 42 CFR Part 70 and 71. You might hear these gangsters down on the border saying, well, Title 42 is in effect, so we're going to leave the gates open. They're relying upon the emergency provisions that have suspended all of our rights. The answer to your question is the Constitution no longer matters so long as they say it doesn't matter. And that's the point here. They are trying to legislate, they're trying to create law while we have no rights to eliminate all of our rights, including the right to replace them, the right to start over, the right to say, no, you don't get to have never-ending emergencies. No, you can't suspend my human rights. That's what they're doing right now because of those declarations.
Okay, now I have another question. When we talked about this whole martial law thing last time. I went to the Constitution and I did a word search. Yes. Martial law does not appear in the Constitution.
No, it doesn't.
There is no martial law in the Constitution. And you cannot pass a law that usurps the Constitution. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. So what's to keep people from saying, I don't recognize your martial law because you have no authority to declare it. You cannot pass a statute that eliminates my constitutional rights.
Yes.
Period. And just ignore it.
That is exactly what must happen because all of this is a bunch of made up bleep stuff. The answer is you're exactly right. And so this is the point, right? We have been fooled into abdicating our rights. For every constitutional right you think you have, there has been an exigent circumstance used as the justification to revoke that right, whether that's your Fourth Amendment right against seizure, search and seizure, or your Fifth Amendment right to due process. How's that working out for our January 6ers guys sitting in a gulag for 20 years? You've got this exactly right. We have no obligation to listen to anything that's unconstitutional, and yet the vast majority of Americans do exactly that.
This episode of SDN is brought to you by Switch It Up, your national grid down service provider. Get a quote on a solar PV system with battery backup at switchitupinc.com or click the link in the video description below. Todd, quick question. So you've mentioned this before. I just want to get some clarification for our audience. What exactly is the Marburg Pandemic, and specific to the J6 people who are in prison? It seems to be like they have no habeas corpus rights to be in prison for that long without being formally charged. Is that correct?
They have no rights whatsoever. And that's exactly the demonstrable point of what I'm saying. So first and foremost, Marburg is a hemorrhagic fever. And it's comparable and often found in the same place as Ebola. So somebody contracts this, that happens, the exchange happens by bodily fluids. It's not airborne. And in Africa, all of a couple of years ago, there was a Marburg outbreak. It turns out truckers going up and down Africa were using the same hookers who transmitted this disease. People fall over dead, bleeding out of their orifices. It has a high fatality rate, something in the 80% range. It also happens that our government made it. And Ebola, we have their patents. So these are man-made diseases that they have outbreaks. And by the way, they just opened up the Ebola and Marburg factories, biolabs, in both Texas and Denver, Colorado. And they started vaccinating, I'm going to use that word in air quotes, public health workers in Colorado. And in the packet to the vaccine, it says, oh, by the way, 31% of the people that get this shed it on others, meaning that the vaccine is causing the disease and now causing that disease in others. So the short answer is Marburg is a hemorrhagic disease fever that is cited specifically in U.S. law as the pretext for the declaration of a public health emergency, the very one that suspends all of your human and constitutional rights. That's written into the law. So when these magic words are uttered, there's a Marburg outbreak, it's a public health emergency, all your rights disappear. And so they've used this as a pretext to taking all your rights and spending billions of dollars building quarantine camps around the United States of America for the purpose of executing on their plan to round people up, put them in these camps, and force them to take some shots. How do we know? Because it's in the statute. 42 CFR Part 70 and 71 are now in effect, and they have been in effect since March 20 of 2020. That's where we sit today.
What was the date again that this happened, Todd? I know you've mentioned it, but I didn't.
March 20, 2020 was the public declaration of a public health emergency, followed immediately thereafter by a declaration by Tedros Adhanom, the director of the World Health Organization. That's a public health emergency of international concern. That has the exact same effect, but globally. So all 194 countries that signed on to the pandemic treaty, otherwise known as the International Health Regulations, have agreed that when those 6 magic words are uttered, everybody across the world loses all their human rights and charter rights and constitutional rights. And that happened in 2020, March of 2020.
Okay, so just so I can tie this together. So basically the people's rights have been suspended because of this Marburg pandemic, which then opens the door to this awful legislation that Senator Markey and Congress Critter Raskin have introduced on January the 11th to trample on people's constitutional rights, which Jeff mentioned already. Is that correct? Is that the order of events here?
Yeah, it is. And frankly, it's almost necessary. The effect of this public health declaration also has the effect of making the Article 3 courts, the place you would seek redress, outside of the ability to opine. So when I sued the DOD 2021, it was the first lawsuit. Lo and behold, it got dismissed. 12 others like it also got dismissed. Why? Because the Article 3 courts, the federal district courts, said it's not justiciable. Why? Because the public health declaration was about COVID, and our DOD declared war on COVID, and the courts will not upset a war in progress. That's what the DOD is doing. The Defense Health Agency is in charge of public health, thanks to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2019 through 2023. Thus, the phrasing medical martial law. The DOD is in charge of public health. The DOD is executing a war on viruses. And the sad part here, ladies and gentlemen, is that we are the viruses. We are the target. We are in the kill box. And
Wow.
you're seeing the legislation created so that you can't get out of the kill box. This is designed to stop you from having any redress, no assembly. You can't undo what they're doing. That's what this is for.
Man, this is a lot to take in. So what are the my first thought on this bill when I heard of it, Todd, was that it doesn't stand a snowball's chance in hell. But based on the information, you've just brought to light, what are the chances? What are the chances of this happening or passing? Could he do it?
It's going to pass. It's going to pass. Why? Because they're all in on it. And you saw the Supreme Court all of a month ago said that Biden has the power to keep the gates open to our border. Why? Because they're all in on it. It took 50 years at least of legal preparation and wrangling to put all this pretext into place so that when that public health declaration was made, everybody's rights evaporated. You could go and get a lap dance, but you couldn't go to church, right? You could go to Target or Walmart, but you couldn't go to mom and pop shop. That happened because your rights were suspended. You're under martial law. And when they told you safe and effective and knew it was a lie, it didn't matter. Why? Because there's a war on a virus nobody can see, nobody can define. And by the way, our government created SARS-CoV-1 and SARS-CoV-2 and the spike protein. How do we know? Because we have the patents. You can only patent man-made things, and our government patented those.
Well, I'm still processing. Mike, weigh in here, and then Don. I want to hear from you guys on this.
Todd, I have a question to back up a little bit. And it's scary what you say, but it just
I hope so.
reconfirms everything else that's going on in this country. I've been back in our country with my career for over 45 years. And sometimes you just feel like throwing up your hands and say, what the heck is wrong with our people? But rather than do that, don't we have the people? Why don't we, as right-wing conservative people, why don't we go on the offense and instead of always playing defense? And why don't we do things to defend the Constitution rather than have to stick up for it? And why don't we propose and pass bills rather than trying to fight our way back to common sense and things that are good for our country. I mean, this thing here, we got
Beautiful.
100,000 people dying a year from drugs coming across the border.
That's right.
And there's maybe
That's right.
40,000 people dying from weapons, and taking away, the regulation and the training for weapons training only makes things worse. It can't make things better in anybody's eyes.
Well, you make a very good point. So let's break this down a little bit. We got more than 100,000 people dead from fentanyl coming across the border. Who's doing anything about that? Why does that problem persist? Why is the border gate welded open? Because I can't remember the article, it might be Article 8. Anyways, the Fourth Hague Convention talks about enemy occupation of our nation. It's the law of war. And it says when an enemy assumes substantial government functions, the war is over, they've won. Who's in the White House? Who's being paid by China? Who's the Secretary of Defense who fragged his own troops, 1.4 million of them, with a poison they called a... Who is in charge? It's not people we elected. The election was stolen. Who's in charge? The point of which is that our country is gone. And on January 10 of last year, Mr. Biden went to Mexico and he met with Trudeau and Obrador and said, this is the Declaration of North America. Under international law, such a declaration is the declaration of the dissolution of your country. Why? Because there's no more borders. He eliminated the borders by declaration on an executive order, on White House letterhead. And who stood up and said, no, you have no power to do that? Did the Congress stand up and say no? Did the Supreme Court stand up and say no? Nobody stopped it. So by abdication, our government has destroyed itself because it's occupied by the enemy. That's the answer to your question. And why do we keep going back? Well, Congress, please pass some laws that'll undo all this. The Congress is taken over. They are the ones doing this to us. Our Constitution isn't observed because we don't demand it to be observed. And this bill, Senate Bill 3589, is designed to make sure that we don't ever get together to take our country back. That's what this is about right now. So the answer to your question is we don't observe, we don't agree, we don't capitulate, we don't abdicate. The answer is no. When they say, I'm going to pass this law, no, we're not going to pass this law, and you're not going to do it either, because I know where you live. That's what must happen, or all bets are off. They've already told the world the United States of America is no more by the Declaration of North America. By the way, that was made 60 years to the day after the Naked Communist, otherwise known as the Communist Manifesto, was read into the congressional record. January 10, 1963, 45 items, action items, number 13 of which is eliminate the oath of office. How many people in this current cabinet have an oath of office? I'll cut to the chase. None. Not one of them has a valid oath of office. Janet Yellen, Alejandro Mayorkas, in charge of the DHS, the guy who welded open the borders, didn't bother to take his oath of office. If they don't serve us, we the people, as manifested by an oath of office, who do they serve?
Not the American people, that's for sure.
That's for sure. They are serving the enemy. Why is it that the vast majority of our Congress have two passports? How is that even possible? Where's their oath of office?
Yeah, almost everybody in the currently installed administration is a dual citizen between America and Israel.
That's right.
Including Mayorkas, who was born in Cuba, but is now a dual citizen of Israel and America.
That's correct.
Und you
And who
will
does he
own
serve?
nothing, and you will like it, and go eat your crickets.
5 U.S. Code 3332 and 3331 says you must have a written sworn oath of office within 30 days of your appointment, or your appointment is void ab initio. Not one member, not a single member of the current administration has a valid oath of office. Let that sink in. We found one member of the Supreme Court who appears to have a valid oath of office. One. Our country is no more, gentlemen. They have taken it over and they fooled everybody into abdicating, into seeking redress with the courts, to seeking redress with the legislature, who has turned on us, who have destroyed our nation. We're seeking help to stop a rape from the rapists.
Mike?
Well,
what are your thoughts on this? I mean, this is escalated from what appeared to be an asinine bill, meaning that people like Mike Glover could no longer instruct people on, you know, training that could be considered paramilitary in nature or militia oriented in nature, to uh, we're in the midst of a constitutional crisis. I mean, you swore an oath, Don swore an oath, Jeff swore an oath. So what are your
So did
thoughts
I.
as somebody who's sworn an oath?
So I go back to, in based upon what Todd is saying, I go back to Frederick Douglass's 4 boxes of liberty. You have the soapbox, the ballot box, the jury box, and finally the cartridge box. So we are currently on the soapbox at this point. That is being restricted more and more on a daily basis. We have the ballot box. That is something that we are still able to do, even though that becomes restricted at higher levels. The jury box. The ballot box is now being taken from us because it's not about who casts the votes, it's about who counts the votes. Thanks, Iosif Stalin. And then what is left once those are gone? The cartridge box is all that is left. Straight for Frederick Douglass, and I quote him on that. So the one thing that
Beautiful.
I look at, this on this is, we go back to what Mike Glover was saying, and essentially this would shut down. This wouldn't just shut down organizations like us or Mike Glover's group, right? This would shut down every gun range in America, right?
That's right.
That's a big industry, boys and girls.
Just
it would
meeting.
Right. It would shut down every martial arts dojo in the country because, they practice folding people's clothes with them still in it. Let's face, because we're looking at here at, you shall not publicly patrol, drill, or engage in techniques capable of causing bodily injury or death. There we go.
That's right.
I mean, it
exactly
shuts
right.
all that down.
Yes,
every
that's
bit
right.
of it.
That's exactly right.
And
this
that
is the
is
last chance.
Right. This is not good. And for them to drop this in this year, and I think you were asking the question about, why aren't we doing anything about this? Because the problem is our side is the side that is the rule of law side, and we're all people that tend to believe in the rule of law.
Yes, exactly.
And that's our problem.
They used it against us, right?
Right.
They took over the process of law, the creation, the writing of law, the execution of law, and the decision of law, the adjudication. They took over all of it. So go back. It's fascinating. Go back to January 10, 1963. Look it up. It's in the Senate. It was read into the record. It's called The Naked Communist, 45 action items to destroy America. Read into our congressional record. All 45 of those items have been ticked. Every last one. We are at the make or break. You've got it exactly right, Don. The cartridge box. And one of the problems we have is bread and circus. The reason nobody is out there fighting, nobody's saying, hell no, is because nobody's hungry, right? Everybody's still eating and everybody's entertained to death. And as long as we're abdicating our responsibilities, we can't be held culpable or liable or responsible for anything, then why do we care? And they've
why not? It worked for the Romans.
Exactly right. And they teach no history anymore in school. None.
I just watched the thing on Nero, and he was doing all these horrendous things when he was the emperor of Rome. Killing his own family members, killing hundreds of senators and people who could oppose him. But the people didn't care because of bread and circuses. He would bring in these games where they would have these exotic beasts and people would fight to the death. It's exactly right. It's bread and circus. And we're there. Think about the internet. Think about this stupid Apple thing now that's you can walk down the street and tap on a computer at the same time. These people are just so detached from the real world. They have no idea. They don't know where their food comes from. They don't know where their electricity comes from. But as long as they get it, They don't care.
You know, Todd, what do you think the chances are that this bill will be passed? And if it does get passed, which I hope personally, maybe I'm too optimistic, I don't think it can be passed. I hope there's enough common sense where that can't be passed, but I've been wrong many times before. But is that something that if we get a guy like Trump back in or somebody like him, can he turn that around and
Yeah.
order?
Well, the short answer to your question is it's going to depend on political will. If people see this and say, hell no, and they start calling all their congressmen and say, hell no, then there's a pretty good chance that it won't happen. Why do I say that? Is because it's fresh in people's mind what happened in Romania in 1994. Ceausescu, right, is in front of everybody giving his dictatorial statement to the audience that he owns, right? He owns the country. The Soviets have left. He's in charge. 3 hours later, he's behind the presidential palace getting shot dead in the head with his wife. How did that happen? Because he went too far. This is a bridge too far. And if people rise up and say, F no, this is not going to happen, then odds are really good that they'll say, wait a minute, guys, not right now. We better rethink this thing. And if that doesn't happen, the odds are 100% this is going to happen because they're all in on it. Every freaking one of them are in on it. Was there anybody standing up saying, hell no, we're not going under medical martial law? No, this isn't a public health emergency. And by the way, did anybody say it's not safe and effective? No, they said, go and get your shots. They all freaking knew. Operation Warp Speed was started in 2016, right? It's not new. They were building PCR tests called COVID-19 tests, which wasn't named COVID-19 in March 2020, but they were building the tests in 2017, financing them for the whole world. This is a plan. And until people understand you are the virus to be eradicated, until we stand up and say no more, we're marching right towards the grave. That's the answer to your question, is until people say, hell no, over my dead freaking body, this will pass 100%, guaranteed.
I have a question. How is this going to impact posse comitatus not from the federal point of view, but the ability of a sheriff to assemble a posse or militia?
It's a great question. It's an absolute great question. So the pretext of this law is that it must be done without authority. So it's private citizens doing these things, but if it's under color of law, that's an exception to the rule. However, my concern of this is Title 18. This is criminal law. So you run into an issue between state and feds as it relates to criminal law. The Constitution said criminal law is a matter for the states to organize because they have the jurisdiction and the crimes happen in the state, right? The federal government is not a state. How does one assert jurisdiction for that? They shouldn't have federal crimes to begin with. They've federalized your constitutional right to assemble and bear arms, and they've made it criminal, right? So what they're doing is usurping law enforcement power from the sheriffs in the exact same fell swoop of that signature, all said and done. So the answer to your question is they should not have that power, but they've given themselves that power. It's federal law. It's the supremacy clause of the Constitution. We're in charge, except for one thing. Joe Biden declared the United States of America dead and dissolved on January 10 of last year. So under what authority does any of this happen anyway?
So this medical martial law, is there an end to it, or do they just keep it in place forever?
No. The Marburg Pandemic declaration that happened on January 1 of this year does not expire until 2028. If you look at the 1994 Cairo Population Accords, 196 countries and territories got together there and decided 7 billion people need to die. And not only that, but those that didn't die need to be made sterile. They gave themselves until December 29 of 2029 to achieve this. So by virtue of the Public Health Declaration and its force in law, it's in the Federal Register. I can send it to you if you want to see it. They've given themselves until 2028 until they give us our rights back. Nobody gives you your rights back. They are God-given. The problem is that they've taken them and nobody said you can't do that.
So a couple obvious questions then. So by granting themselves all of these powers, what's the effect on elections and transfer of power?
Yeah, they're going to federalize the elections. We're already seeing that happening. So what did Mike Pence do? He abdicated his federal authority, right? He had the opportunity to say, hey, something's wrong here. Let's have a recount. The states are in charge of elections. Federalism dictates that he say, let's let the states figure this shit out. But he didn't do that, did he? Right. What he did is he federalized the elections. He says, no, I'm in charge. There was nothing wrong. You cannot contest this. And that's precisely what happened. The courts refused to hear it. Thank you, Mr. Pence. That was his doing. So the beauty of this, gentlemen, is that the sheriffs are really the last line of defense. There is no law without law enforcement. So I keep preaching to the hills and anybody to listen. We've got to get local law enforcement on our sides. Deputize your citizens. We're seeing how this works out in Texas right now on the border. Right, the federal government abdicated its responsibility for border protection, and Governor Abbott stepped in and said, okay, fine, we'll do that. And the Texas Constitution gave him the authority to do that. It says there's an invasion. He found by decree, governor decree, there's an invasion that gave him all the powers of a country onto himself, including the ability to say, no, federal government, I'm no longer part of you anymore. Look at the 10th Amendment. Right. And believe it or not, DeSantis did this back in 2022, if memory serves. He said this is the state guard, not the National Guard. Right, so if our states stand up and say, no, federal government, we don't give a crap what this says. This doesn't work. And we're no longer part of your nonsense. Then, in fact, this would have no power and the state constitutions would prevail. They all say the same thing as the federal constitution, by the way. Some have additional rights. But without the states, there is no federal government. And we need to remind the people in D.C. exactly that. They don't exist without us. But until we find people wearing pants, willing to stand up and deputize their citizens, all is lost.
Well, we saw that in Arizona with the sheriffs because, I'm fortunate Mark Lamb is my sheriff. Yep. But in COVID, the governor, who was a Republican at the time, but he was talking about doing these stay-at-home orders. And Mark Lamb and several other county sheriffs stood up and said, no, this is not constitutional. We're not going to enforce it. And Beautiful. You can't have Maricopa County saying you got to stay home, but if you drive 2 blocks and you're in Pinal County, you don't have to. So the whole thing just fell apart because, again, they didn't have the ability to enforce it. Even if you took the highway patrol, the state police, right. They can't go everywhere and enforce this thing, and they probably end up getting shot in the process anyway. Because you tell somebody who's standing out in his yard, he can't stand out in his yard, he's probably going to go, F you.
There is no law without law enforcement, and I think it's a brilliant point you made. And we saw this when the governor of New Mexico said, we have a public health emergency, no more guns. Right? The sheriff in Albuquerque did exactly what you described. There is no law without law enforcement. And by the way, we do have a fighting chance, gentlemen, because we poisoned the well already. The military, when I sued the DOD, use of force was authorized. We filed a TRO and raised holy hell inside the DOD. What are you going to do? Hold black guys down and do this? You're going to have white people holding black people down doing this? And we made it so unconscionable that they put it in the drawer, but they never revoked the authority. Use of force is and always was authorized to treat you. They could shoot you with liquid or lead. It doesn't matter. The result is the same. The point is that the military said no. 400,000 service members stood up and said, no, we're not doing this. We stopped the biggest killing machine on the planet by saying no. We can stop these gangsters by saying no. It takes the public will. It takes your sheriffs. It takes everybody saying no.
So let me throw a curveball in here. Last week, Keith Graves, 30-year law enforcement officer, SWAT team leader, drug interdiction, subject matter expert, and a gentleman by the name of Tactical Carl, who's out of Houston. He was Army for years before that and was deployed to the border in years gone by as a sheriff's deputy now. We had a discussion around California, and some other states are considering doing the same thing, allowing illegal aliens to become law enforcement. And Keith was telling us, and it was backed up by Carl as well, that Newsom will, issue an edict, for lack of a better term. And Keith said one of two things happens. The cops either say that's not constitutional and we are not going to enforce that, Or, okay, sure, no problem. And Keith called it pseudo policing, where, it's a half-assed attempt to do it. And the conclusion out of all of that was that Newsom is, giving these illegal aliens the opportunity to be law enforcement so that he has more control, and they're not bucking him like current law enforcement is, and hanging it over their head that if they don't do as he orders, that he'll revoke their green card or citizenship or throw them out of the country, something to that effect. So how does that play into this whole mess of, okay, the sheriffs aren't going to be compliant for the most part, law enforcement is going to be compliant for the most part, but what if we replace law enforcement with people who are beholden to the powers that be?
You know who the last guy was that did this? 1937, Hitler. He couldn't get the local cops to take away their neighbors in the middle of the night, so he got rid of it. He created tension between the local cops and the people who demanded, we need federal troops, we need foreign troops that are going to protect us. And that's what he supplied. The exact same thing is happening right now. We've got a whistleblower in the military who sent us video of a city inside of Fort Bliss, full of military-aged men flown in the middle of the night, no customs clearance, no immigration, and they are there. This was back in 2021. God knows how many they brought in since. The answer is this is a tried and true method. You look at what happened with the truckers in Canada. Right, they're up there peacefully assembling, and the cops join them for barbecues. Next thing you know, 4 white C-141s show up at the airport in Ottawa. The next day, new cops, new uniforms, and the people are getting beat senseless. So the answer to the question is this is a tried and true plan. They are simply implementing it. And you got it right. Unless the cops themselves say this is an illegal order, this will happen. Right? Because it's happened before, it'll happen again until we say no. And it requires those with the real oath of office to say, no, it's not constitutional. Our Attorney General, and I'll shout for a minute, our Attorney General and U.S. Attorney both have defective oaths of office. The highest law enforcement officers in the entire country have invalid oaths of office. The Attorney General doesn't even have a date of appointment. What does that tell you? So until all of the cops, the guns and the badges say, hey, sheriff, where's your oath of office? I want to see that. Until that happens and people start standing for their oath, all is lost.
So I have a question for Jeff, Mike, and Don. The three of you have served overseas in multiple different countries. Have you ever seen anything like this elsewhere in our lifetimes? Like, I agree with what Todd's saying. Like, Hitler's a great case study on this. But have you seen this happen anywhere else? Is this kind of the way business is conducted in China, for example? Anywhere else?
I mean, the closest that I can think of on this, like the Sandinistas.
They had Cubans.
Yeah.
There were places in Africa where they brought in Cuban troops.
Angola
was one. Grenada. The only effective military or law force in Grenada were Cubans that we ended up kicking out. But it's not new. I mean, the Romans would bring in legions, quote unquote, from Germany because the Italian legions were loyal to someone else, and so they would bring down a Gallic legion or a German legion who would respond to them. And that's one of the reasons Nero fell out, is because there were generals who had troops loyal to them, only to them, who were starting to march down on Rome. And that's when Nero fled and ended up committing suicide.
So this whole thing with Newsom allowing these invaders to become law enforcement, I thought it was a stupid idea when I first heard of it, but I didn't connect the dots like you guys have done with this, history repeating itself.
Brown shirts.
Yeah, it's even more dangerous than, I thought it was.
Yeah, this is an incredibly slippery slope, because if you look at the historical precedent for times that this has been tried, and a lot of the time it does fail, how does it fail? Well, it winds up failing because you get a strong man comes in, and we're talking somebody like, we're talking somebody like a Julius Caesar. We're talking somebody like Joseph Stalin, somebody like that. Usually that person comes in, that strong man comes in and is normally not a benevolent strong man. That person comes in and winds up butchering lots of people.
What an important point you just made. I think this is absolutely critical to the analysis. You're absolutely right. And I must confess to you, gentlemen, that the pretext, the setup is here. The owners of this world, the ones who cause these things, their motto is Ordo ab Chao. There's nothing they would rather have. That means order from chaos. For those that don't speak Latin, there's nothing they would rather have than a civil war, so that they could roll in with their strongman, just as you described, and take it all over and say, from here on out, this is it. This is my country. You'll do as I say. I would say I have a slight concern. I can't channel the man. I'm not inside of his head. But the very same pretext is set up for Mr. Trump. Everybody's got a whole lot of faith in him, and I have a whole lot of hope in him. However, the exact same scenario is being set up right now for that very situation.
Well,
In what
I
way?
keep diving back into history here, but Caesar appointed himself dictator for life, or got appointed dictator for life. Then he was assassinated. Then there was a civil war in Rome, and it only ended when Octavian, who later became Caesar Augustus, became the emperor, and he ruled for 40 years. They had been a republic before that. It didn't work out because you had one strongman, Caesar, who ignored the rules, and then he was killed, and you had a civil war, and then you had another strongman who came in and took control.
Yeah, the only thing that we can really hope for is a Marcus Aurelius in a situation like this.
What's the common denominator here? There's a really important point of what you just said, Jeff. How did that happen? Because the populace allowed it to happen. Look, there is no governance without the consent of the governed.
Because what Caesar did, he was a wealthy man, and the elites hated him. He catered to the plebs, the average man in Rome. They loved him, so he had power. And when he when he became consul and then became dictator, they had to kill him because they couldn't get rid of him any other way because the people wouldn't let him.
Wow.
There's a whole lot of brain cells being burned up on this episode of Survival Dispatch.
Yeah, I mean, there was a second one that there was a quick second one that I forgot on there. Either a Marcus Aurelius or a Lucius Cincinnatus. That's our only two options.
You guys are awesome. I love this history lesson. Thank you.
So there's another thing. What's going on right now is you look what's going on to the military when they did this witch hunt for right-wing extremists in the military, and they're basically trying to find them and kick them out. So you're going to get the red-blooded patriotic American guys who joined the military because their dad did and their brother did, and it's a family tradition. They're getting driven out, and who are they replacing them with? How many aliens?
Well, right now they're not replacing them with anybody.
Yeah, but they can get a fast track to citizenship by joining the military.
Right.
Well, if you want to become a U.S. citizen so badly and you get in the military, are you going to give a rat's ass about the Constitution? Or are you going to do what gets you your end goal, which is to get to stay here forever? And then you're putting in all the, the Fruit Loops, the trannies and all this other stuff. So you're not only weakening our military, but you're instilling people whose sole loyalty are to the administration that put them in there, that let them
important.
El Papi Biden.
Yeah.
Well, let's also keep in mind, gentlemen, that they forced a poison shot on all the troops. You had 400,000 said we're not doing it, but I've got whistleblowers inside the military. These are medical doctors. Some are flight surgeons. These are top docs in the military, and the idea is that their disability rates have gone up so high, people can't pull duty. So what are they doing? They're recruiting the guys that came across the border illegally. They didn't take any shots. They weren't required to. Everybody else that came in legally, you had to take the shots, right? Or you couldn't get your visa to come in. You couldn't travel. You couldn't apply. But the guys coming across the border didn't take the shots. They're just fine. So we have a destroyed military. And I keep saying this, but it's true. Lloyd Austin fragged the military. How do I know that? Because I told him he was about to do it, and he did it anyway. So I served him with a TRO with all of the evidence to say, hey, this is polyethylene glycol. This is dangerous. All the test animals died. Don't do this. And he did it anyway, right? That's intentional. So that's what I'm trying to say. People don't understand this. Our country's being destroyed by the people who run it.
So let me throw a wrinkle in here because Joe Biden multiple times has said that you need a F-15, F-16 if you're going to go up against the government. So speaking of history, so 3% of the
Tell
colonists
that to
stood
the
up.
Afghans.
Yeah, 3% of the colonists stood up to the King of England over the tax on the tea and said, no more. And we gained our independence. If you do the numbers today, depending on, what you want to peg the population at, 3% of the population, somewhere between 10 and 12 million people, let's say. And that's an order of magnitude more than law enforcement, military, and reservists are combined. Maybe you've got 2.5 million-ish for that. And you got to think that half of those guys in law enforcement and the military are actually the good guys. They're not the bad guys that we've been discussing. So and I've been saying for quite some time, you guys have all heard me say this, the Second Amendment is the firewall between globalism and freedom. So there's a wrinkle here. Unlike in Rome, for example, and these other countries, we have a heavily armed populace. And every time I hear Joe Biden say you need F-15s or F-16s, because he said both, to go up against the government, my retort to that is, well, other than a handful of MiGs that were shot down very early in the Vietnam War, did they have an Air Force? Did they have a Navy? Did they have heavy artillery? They had none of those things in North Vietnam. And they essentially won with a bunch of shitty AK-47s, good for hitting everything around your target. So I just want to hear everybody's opinion on that. What happens if 3% of the people in America stand up and say, no way, we're not going to stand for this?
It'll work. It'll fail. They know it'll fail. That's what this bill is designed to do, to stop you from collaborating, getting together and saying no.
Yeah.
And that's the way I saw it.
I had friends that were pilots in the Air Force and things like that, the best man at my wedding. I cannot imagine any circumstance in the world in which he would get in his A-10 and go strafe Americans in Tucson. And that's what Biden seems to think the military will do. A lot of those guys did swear an oath, and a lot of those guys are extremely patriotic people. I don't see them just willy-nilly slaughtering American citizens. I know I sure as hell wouldn't do it.
Let me add something. You all ex-military, I'm sure you've seen the School of the Americans, right? We've been training foreign troops in our aircraft, our weapon systems now at least 30 years. I've been out a long time. They were doing it back when I was in the 80s. So they don't have to get an American to jump in the A-10. Or they can get somebody else. When we left behind $83 billion worth of military equipment in Afghanistan, the next day there were guys flying Blackhawks around. Who was that?
The Afghans we trained.
ANA guys. The good thing is 90% of that equipment all belonged to the Afghan government and Afghan National Army, and they don't understand this cool concept called maintenance.
Yes. Yeah, it's like having a Russian helicopter, a 40-year-old Russian helicopter. I would not get in that thing for all the tea in China.
A lot of that
is not all we believed it to be. And I hate to say this too, as a 20+ year military veteran, we did great World War II. We did great. U.S. stayed intact. Our economy was great. We had respect all over the world. Okay, we were doing really, really great. We lost Vietnam. But you come all the way up to the 90s. Now there's one superpower left, and it's us. We just, in Afghanistan, Iraq, just got out of those two 20-year wars. Basically, most people say we didn't do that well. And we're fighting people running around with flip-flops and AK-47s. Now we have this woke agenda. These people come out of high school and colleges who've been indoctrinated for 20 years under this woke philosophy, this mindset, and they're coming in. They don't have the same love of country we all have, and we all grew up having. And now they're coming into a military that's no longer respected around the world. I mean, we have an aircraft carrier out to try to deter people out for Hezbollah. I mean, they could care less. Now they have missiles and systems that can take out our ships. We really aren't much of a defensive deterrence anymore, like we used to be and that we could count on. Right now, 95% of the population, not the countries, but 95% of the population of the world has turned against us in Israel. I mean, BRICS is growing now. They've got 30 people on the waiting list to get in 30 countries waiting to get in BRICS. Our military is weak. Of course, the recruitment, it's not what they all say in the Pentagon is because of COVID. It's that disastrous pullout in Afghanistan, and we haven't really done anything since then. And it all goes back down, in my opinion, to leadership. We need a super strong man. And at first, to tell you the truth, I wasn't all for a guy like Trump because I thought he belittled the White House a little bit. I thought he belittled the office. I didn't like the way he'd talk to generals and people like John McCain. Now I'm to the viewpoint like the left, the people who are destroying our country, which in my opinion is way worse than any enemy we've ever faced. They are destroying our country faster than anybody else. Now we need a powerful man, a Superman, and people to support this guy and tear up these bills. And like I said earlier, go on the offense because our military is in bad shape right now. I mean, basically, Ukraine's not going well at all. The Hamas-Israel thing is not going well. If we go into Hezbollah, that's not going to go well. Who knows what else? You go after the Houthis in Yemen, that's not going well. We are spread so thin, we can't make the ammo and the necessary armaments we need and the equipment we need to fight these wars. And we keep committing ourselves with a weaker and weaker force. And so our military is not what we all believe it to be, where we're all gung-ho pro-patriots. Those days are behind us. It can turn around, I'm sure. I haven't given up hope. But we have a lot to do to get back on our footing.
Yeah. But again, we go back to we need somebody strong up there, as a figurehead, trying to guide everybody forward, some good solid leadership. But the problem comes when you get that. Do you get a Marcus Aurelius or do you get a Pol Pot? You got to be real careful which one you're going to get.
Or do you get none of that? That was my whole question to Todd, was that if we're under this medical martial law and they may not respect an election, they may not transfer power.
For sure.
It's all a moot
For
point.
sure.
It's all a moot point.
But it's not. But it's not a moot point. What you just said is exactly right. The question is whether we will tolerate it. Right? We all know the last election was stolen.
Absolutely.
Even the ones on the left, right? They know it. They just don't want to know it. So what I've learned over the last 3 or 4 years in this journey and litigation against our government is that it's the power of hope that actually controls things. People don't want to confront that they poisoned themselves, they poisoned their kids. They hope they didn't. But they know deep down inside they did. Until we start confronting the truth, until we demand the truth of others, we're still stuck in this hope paradigm. And as long as that happens, they'll hope that the election happens and they'll hope that there isn't cheating and they'll hope that Mr. Trump wins. Until that paradigm changes, you can be assured that hope is going to lead right to the freaking grave and 7 billion people will be no more. That's their plan. They wrote it down. So how do we change that is the question I think that you really want to put forth, Chris.
That's where I'm going.
It takes this meeting multiplied by 1,000 or 1,000,000 times. Everybody has to understand the paradigm and then find the courage to confront the truth. Right? The three of you guys sitting there today, I see the looks on your faces. You are confronting the truth, and it's mighty uncomfortable. And you might have known it already, but now you're going, oh, maybe this is something we need to do something about. Yes, we've got to grab everybody by the shoulders and shake the living tar out of them. Wake up, because the end is here. So there's a prayer. The hope is that we wake people up in time. And God love him. I actually think that's what Mr. Trump is trying to do. I think he's letting people see exactly how bad this is. My hope, my prayer is that he's the good guy that we want. But we know that.
I've been making some notes here, and I'd like to get everybody to weigh in on this before we go to the conflicted question. But the one thing we've always tried to do since we started Survival Dispatch News was to say, okay, number one, here's what's going on. Number two, here are the actionable things you can actually do. So, for example, there's not a whole lot that the five of us can do with regards to what happened in Gaza and what's going on between Hezbollah and Israel in the grand scheme of things. But we do have control of some of our stuff here domestically. We have control over things like buying guns and ammunition and prepping and training and all these things, right? But specific to this topic, I wrote down a couple things that have been voiced here by all of you. Number one was to call and write your Congress critters and tell them this bill is NFG and I will not vote for you if you vote for this garbage. Number one. Number two, I like how Todd said it. I had it written differently, but I'm going to go with his words, to spread the word amongst others. And that's
which
difficult.
is what we're doing right here.
Yeah.
It's exactly what we're doing right here. And it's difficult with the censorship, though, from big tech, big brother, and big media, right? And through the process of spreading the word, to put the truth out there, like confront the BS, for lack of a better term. And these are in my own words. I didn't capture somebody else, but basically stand up for your rights. Like stand up. Stop being, because we've had this discussion on Survival Dispatch News. In every point in history where one group has just wanted to be left alone and the other group has refused to leave them alone, that the group that wants to be left alone gets steamrolled unless they stand up for themselves. And we've got to hit some sort of tipping point where we do stand up for ourselves. We are not advocating violence or anything like that, but we've got to make it uncomfortable enough by speaking up that we're not going to stand for this shit anymore. Sheriffs are definitely, I think, one of our greatest allies. So I made a note of that. We've got the 2A in our favor, that no other country that I'm aware of has that same type of rights that we do, or has had those in the past. So there's another spot we have to stand up for our rights and don't let them take our guns and ammunition and now training away from us as well. Holy shit, I'd already be in jail by now. I weapons train 5 days a week, and I dry fire train. I train with crossbows, longbows, pistols, SBRs, and everything in between. And I have no intention of stopping that, and I just turned 55 yesterday, and I'll keep doing it until I can't do it anymore.
He's so old.
Yeah, your turn's coming here in a few months, mister.
Puppy.
That's a buddy of mine turned 55 on Saturday, and I turned 55 on Sunday, or Monday, pardon me. So I teased him for 48 hours. I told him he's AARP and I'm not. But then, of course, he reached out to me last night and said, welcome to the club. And then we went to the Awful Waffle on the way home from Georgia, and Mike was right. They wouldn't give me my seniors discount.
See, told you.
He said, don't go to the Awful Waffle. They won't give you your seniors discount. Okay, sorry. I didn't mean to get off track there.
I would like to throw one more point in on this.
That's what I'm asking for.
So this is something that Joe brought up on a discussion with
Jason Sawyer.
Yeah, with Jason the other day. So one of the things that he said that is a little bit of a poison pill in this whole plan is that you have got a massive community of pretty highly trained people who already very much distrust the government because they've been screwed over by the government, called the GWAT veteran generation. You get this huge quantity of combat veterans, not just well trained, but also well experienced, right? There's a huge quantity of us that have been training people since we got back. And that was Mike Glover's big thing. He's a former special forces guy, and he's been training civilians since actually before he got out. So you've got a great dearth of knowledge and training already in place. So as long as you don't let that training, even if this does go through, right, it doesn't matter.
Do it anyway.
Because you've got all those people already trained. They're already there.
They'll do something.
Right?
If they'll do something, that's the issue.
Right.
Is will they abdicate? Because they've abdicated. We've all abdicated to this point. That's why there's 3 or 4 billion Walking Dead right now. They abdicated their own due diligence and said, sure, they rolled up their sleeves and took the shot. They're Walking Dead.
And just to be a contrarian, let's keep in mind that the skills that we're discussing are perishable skills. They're thinking, if you don't practice this stuff on a routine basis, I mean, I got sick in December, Todd, for the first time since 1998. I just don't get sick. I just worked too many hours and was run down. And for a couple of weeks, I didn't do a whole lot of weapons training. And when I dry fire train, the system tells me what my efficiency rate is in a percentage. And I lost a good 10, 15% for that first week back in training. and gain it back
Wow.
again. And that's
Oh, yeah.
only a short
That's a
window of time
lot.
for a couple of weeks. I got it back
It
fast,
goes.
but my point is these are perishable skills. It's like the guy who goes and buys
So
the
is liberty.
guns. Guy goes and buys the guns, goes to the range, gets familiar with control, shoots it a couple times, then doesn't go shooting again for many months or years. You can't expect to be proficient at it, right? These, like I say, perishable skills. What else are we missing, or did I miss as far as
I want to
actionable
add
steps?
something. I want to add something. Look, we can figure out who the good guys and the bad guys are because that's half the problem in the fog of war, right?
Isn't
Who's
it?
shooting, who isn't? How do we identify them? And I made reference to it before we filed a writ quo. We're onto it. That means by what authority do you act? And the federal government ignored it. But since that point in time, we've had a lot of Americans stand up and start FOIA-ing, Freedom of Information Act requests. Who's got an oath of office? Because that's the determining factor. If you swore an oath, like every one of us here swore an oath, we actually meant it, wrote it down, right? That counts. And what you find is the bad guys refuse to have an oath of office. They either don't do it or they intentionally make it defective. So if we want to know who the good guys and bad guys are, show me your oath of office. It's got to be written. In some states, it has to be sworn. In some states, it doesn't, but it's prescribed language. Why did we require oaths of office after the Civil War? Because half the country didn't have any allegiance to the prospect of a nation. We demanded it in 1865. We need to demand it again. Are you in for this country or are you not? It's the starting point. Everybody go to your sheriff. Everybody go to your mayor. Everybody go to your city council. Where is your oath of office? If you don't have one, guess what? They're breaking the law. It is a crime to impersonate a federal official. It's a crime to impersonate an officer. It's a crime to impersonate a civil servant. We need only the guns and badges to enforce the law, which is already on the books. Where's your oath of office? I want to see it. And if you know what? If I had one and I was in a prominent position, it'd be on my wall. Here it is. I'm proud of it.
Fair enough. Jeff, Don, is there anything else that we can do as citizens?
Yeah, I would
Actionable
almost
items.
take a page from the liberals' playbook. Civil disobedience. You got to wear a mask. Don't wear a mask. And if you're by yourself, they may hassle you. But if there's 20 of you, 30 of you, 50 of you not wearing a mask, are they going to arrest? Is that one or two cops going to arrest 50 people?
Well, they tried that in Los Angeles and it didn't work out.
Yeah, it would probably work here in Tucson. But I mean, because there's a lot of people are just like, no, I'm fed up. And you got to let people know you're fed up. And if the officials go, you know what? 3/4 of the people who vote for me are pissed off about this stuff. Maybe I'll change my opinion so I can get reelected.
Fair enough.
They're political windsocks.
Don?
Yeah, they are.
What is the NRA's, what's their stance on this bill? I'm sure it's pretty much in line with how we're all thinking, but do they have anything? That powerful lobby behind them?
I haven't looked it up, but I know that Wayne Lapierre is gone, but I lost confidence in the NRA many years ago, so I don't really follow them very closely. I'd rather hear what Gun Owners of America and those sort of groups have to say. The FPC, Firearms Policy Coalition, these are really active guys. The NRA is a shadow of its former self, so... Yeah. Mike, you see anything there before we move on?
I'm looking, man. I'm looking. It doesn't look like they've weighed in on this yet.
That tells you everything.
Well, yeah, they're waiting for orders.
Right. Yeah. Silence is deafening.
Here.
All right, Mike, let's do the conflicted question of the day.
God, this is a good one today. I'm telling you. Okay. Once again, conflicted question of the day. After the end of the world, you're traveling a year to get back to your spouse or significant other. So clearly you walked all the way across the continent, only to find they believed you died and have started a new family. You know what? That happens.
Rick and Shane from The Walking Dead. There you go.
All right. So their group offers to let you stay with them. Considering you are out of supplies and have seen no other groups, would you join them? Still awkward. Go.
Jeff, you go first this time.
I would join them because, I understand that they think I'm dead and you got to move on. But if there's children involved, still my kids. Mm-hmm. All right. I'm going to do whatever I got to do to make sure my kids are safe. And My wife, if she moved on because of that, I understand it. May not like it, but I definitely understand it, because flip it. What would happen if you thought she was dead? You may find a new spouse. So if it wasn't done out of meanness or spite or lack of love, it was done out of basically being practical. So I wouldn't hold it against them, and I would join the group. Who knows? You might find a new honey.
I'm with Jeff on this one. There's no malice, and it's a safe haven, and some of the people there. I would suck it up and join the group as well, for all the same reasons that Jeff stated. Don, how would you handle this?
Did Chris lock? Oh, there he is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with Jeff as well. But while you're walking, for however long that walk is going to be, you could be thinking all along the time, by not giving up hope. Okay, there's still a chance. And this happened how many times during the Holocaust, when a man would go find his woman at the other camp, and throughout the war, they haven't given up hope, and they happily, got together. I would not give up hope, and think for that long, long walk. Stay with the family. You've got to worry about your own survival. But while you're there, thinking about how you might be able to find your loved ones, and just don't give up hope. Like Winston Churchill said, never, ever, ever, ever give up. And that's what would have to do in that situation.
Todd.
Yeah, wonderful rationale. It's so fun to hear that come out. This life is hard as it is right now, and without a partner, it's doubly hard. So I can only imagine at the end of the world, scarce resources. I think out of necessity is born, the mother of invention. So I agree with all of you. I think that you would have to understand and rationalize what has happened, but resources are resources, and you would do your level best to become a resource to them too, and not a burden.
Yeah, well said, Todd. Mike, have you got a contrarian opinion, or are you rowing in the same direction as the rest of the crew?
No,
today?
I mean, back to the bottom of this, considering I'm out of supplies and have seen no other groups, and I've been on the road for a year. Yeah, I'm pretty much going to stay here. And I mean, like you guys said, there was no malice involved. I mean, heck, I had an ex-wife that treated me like I was dead, and I was in the same room with her. So, yeah, this is not a bad thing here. Yeah, I'm staying, especially if I've got kids involved. Yeah, absolutely. I'm capable of moving on. Thank you very much.
Right on. Okay, well, listen, I appreciate everybody's time and insight today. This is I did not expect this episode to go the way that it did. I really felt that the crux of today was going to be this proposed bill shows just how asinine and maniacal the left is, but it turned out it was even worse than that. So, my wheels are still spinning from the plethora of information that Todd in particular dropped on us today. But like I said, gentlemen, thank you for your insight. Look forward to the next time. Everybody out there, stay safe and stay frosty.
God bless.
This video is sponsored by William Tell Archery Supplies, home of the Mini Striker crossbow. Click the link in the description below to learn more.